Good afternoon, everyone. It's Tuesday, March 19th, 2024. Welcome to the Council Chambers. I'm going to call our special council meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. We're going to start with a moment of silent reflection, but before we do so, I'm going to just read out a message. It is with deep respect and sadness that we acknowledge the passing of Kim Rudd, who served as Member of Parliament for Northumberland, Peterborough South from 2015 to 2019. Kim was not only a distinguished public servant, but also a remarkable community member whose passionate voice for women and whose contributions to her community extended far beyond the political arena. Her commitment and dedication to so many important causes, both within politics and in our community, will leave a lasting legacy, and our sincerest condolences are extended to her family and her friends. Please join me in a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. We'll move on to item 1.2, our land acknowledgement. The municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope. We also learn from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Moving on to item number 2, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? I know that none were received in advance of tonight's meeting. Seeing none, I'll move on to item number 3, deputations. It is now time for deputations from members of the public. Remember, deputations may only be made on a matter that is on the council agenda. Our community members are always encouraged to actively participate in our democratic process by making deputations. This method gives everyone an opportunity and a chance to express their opinions, concerns, and suggestions about topics on the council's agenda, playing a crucial role in the decision-making process for various issues, policies, or projects. In accordance with our procedural bylaw, in order to provide a deputation to council, you must register in advance, but you can register one day before the meeting. Visit our municipal website for complete registration details, or please contact our clerk if required. So tonight we have 3 deputations. In fact, I think this is the first time that we've had deputations under our new procedural bylaw. The first deputation at 3.1, Philip Goldsmith, and I welcome Mr. Goldsmith to the podium and remind him that he has 5 minutes to make a deputation to council. Please press the purple button to speak, and I do understand that you have a visual aid to accompany your deputation.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, thank you, councillors. Before I even begin, I would like to ask for an extension of the 5 minutes in order to get through this important subject.
That is granted.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Okay, let's see if we can make this work. I'm Phil Goldsmith. I'm an architect that specializes in building conservation, and I have worked for 50 years in this field on all manner of buildings. I've been responsible for buildings in good condition, and I've been responsible for buildings after serious catastrophes, including fire and serious demolition. I'll also add that I was the restoration architect on this project for the current owner at the time of the proposals that were discussed about 2 years ago. And so I've been through this building from one end to the other in its current condition, despite the fact that it was very difficult. In the process of coming up with proposals for the site, I assessed the condition of the building. I looked at the priorities for conservation and heritage attributes. This is a designated heritage building, and so those heritage attributes are important in terms of its conservation. And so I will go forward if this works, which it's not. What am I doing wrong? I'm pressing forward. Can you advance the slide? Sorry. Small technical glitch. I
Just a
apologize.
moment for the technical glitch, yes.
Okay. So second slide. There we go. Yeah. I wanted to flag this project that many of you might be aware of. I was the architect on this project from about 1995 to 2001, just before Evergreen showed up. This is the Toronto Brickworks. Similar to this site, this was abandoned for about 20 years. It's in the floodplain of the Don Valley, and it had quite a number of buildings of various sizes and various conditions. The buildings were from reasonable, as we have, to collapsed or near collapse. And so in that period, we worked hard to preserve as much as we could of the buildings that were threatened, that were significant. But I will say that some of the buildings that were less significant were removed. This was a project that was conceived by the City of Toronto on lands that ended up being owned by the Conservation Authority. When we did this work, there was no proposed use for the site. We imagined a proposed use through a master plan that was developed at that time. In 2006, Evergreen came to the site. They took on a head lease and took charge of all the buildings. They were a not-for-profit that raised millions of dollars, and through their work, restored the buildings to what you see today, which is very exciting. And I'm not taking you through a whole presentation about the brickworks. There we go. No. Oh. There we go. What I'd like to do is talk about the reimagining of this complex, the File Factory. It's an important heritage asset in town. It is the last of our heritage industrial complexes, of which there were many at one time along the river. The heritage industries that built Port Hope. This is the last one. It's a complex that covers a lot of years, and so it tells the story of industrial growth from the very beginning in the 1850 component that was the original Beamish Mill through to the 1950s when the building was finally at its maximum and then sold off when they built a new building. So it's important not to lose sight of its significance, not just as a building, but culturally to the community. And the fact that it is by the river makes it a very attractive and romantic place. I can't go through its whole history, but I will show you this slide, which is a mix of images. The Beamish Mill is this component, which still has its head race, tail race, and turbine room below the floor in the stone component of the building. The upper story, I think, was changed in around the 1870s. It probably had a more typical mill-like form in its original composition, but it's still largely intact and was the first building on this site. I personally think it's dramatic and interesting and very artistic. And forgive me for showing you one of my own artworks there, but I really think that it's an asset to the town, and eventually would be an asset to Riverwalk. I wanted to show you this diagram. This was a base drawing from the Nicholson File Factory Works itself. All of the buildings are numbered from 1 to about 30 is the highest number. And it illustrates, just if I can look at mine, I can't quite see that one. It illustrates the periods in which these buildings were constructed. So you can see that that central axis, which is right in the middle of Block 2. Block 2 is outlined by the red arrows and the dashed red line. Block 2 comprises about 1/3 of the site. It demolishes the earliest and most interesting buildings on the site. So the Beamish building was Building 1, but they don't call it Building 1, they call it Building 3. And Building 1 was the building that was constructed as the first Nicholson File Factory. Well, it was the Globe File Factory, but anyway, later Nicholson File Factory. And that's along that same axis, 1870 to 1889. Everything else is an addition. So as you can see, there are a series of additions from 1870 right up to about 1935 would be the most recent, although there were smaller bits added, as I said before, up to the 1950s. So this proposal to demolish that much of the site would actually remove some of the most important heritage buildings in this heritage complex. The next image looks at value, if you would. And so in terms of the value of the buildings, in terms of their public recognition, part of the public realm, facing the river, facing the street, facing the park to the south, and possibly in future parklands to the north. So the green lines represent what at the time a couple of years ago we felt were the most significant walls. The blue lines represent walls that are least significant, and some of the blue walls define whole buildings, which we felt were least significant at the time that we did this study. You can see that within the block that's going to be proposed for demolition, the exterior walls on the street and on the river and some of the even courtyard building walls were seen as priority walls, whereas the walls of Building 1 extending back to Building 3 are in blue. They are seriously compromised from their original, having been buried in the composition of other buildings over time. This next slide illustrates a series of conditions. And so the color code ranges from deteriorated and collapsed, as we're discussing today, to conditions that are relatively easily renovated. So the dark blue are areas that have collapsed, with the dotted X's showing areas within buildings that have specifically collapsed. So you can see the area at the front of Building 1, which is in the middle. The area about 4 or 5 columns back has collapsed. The next dotted lines represent skylights, and then the next dotted line represents a wood floor over the turbine room under the old Beamish Mill. To the right, Building 4, the roof has collapsed along its central axis, and the floor is also in trouble in that same area. If you look at Building 6, which is the building on Cavan Street, the area with the X to the left has collapsed, but the balance of that building is actually recoverable and is within Block 2 of the proposed demolition. Now, it's interesting to me, Building 3 with a huge X in it is in terrible condition, but that's not in Block 2. And I'm fascinated by why it has been left out of this discussion. because its floor has completely collapsed into the crawl space below, and its roof structure is also in trouble. I'm basing block 2 on the staff report. I haven't seen the engineer's report, sorry. So jumping way ahead, this brings us to a proposal that I prepared for a lecture I gave at the Capitol Theater last October. And it looks at how we might use this site. So I'd like to start with a discussion about that. I feel that this site should come into public ownership. I strongly feel that, just like the story of the brickworks, and that's why I use it as a parallel example. I feel, having worked with an owner for several years on this site through several iterations of a proposal, that it will be extremely difficult to find a user that can make this a profit-making enterprise. So what we have is a difficult position for an owner. And I must say, the owner bought the building in this condition, so the staff report blames this current owner. I wouldn't exactly do that, because the building was pretty much in this shape when they bought it. But you have a private owner who has tried several times to make a proposition work here and has failed and has put the site up for sale. And we have a site that is of high heritage value, with tremendous community interest, and the potential on our own Riverwalk master plan to be a very significant node as a public facility. So I strongly feel that, in principle, this site should fall into private ownership. And there are methods for doing that I'm happy to discuss later, in terms of purchase and sale and zoning and one thing and another that can make it work financially. I know financially it's probably a concern to council to pick up a site of this complexity. But I do feel that it's important that the municipality act in that transition like they did in Toronto with the transition of the brickworks. If they hadn't, the brickworks would have collapsed and been demolished and not be the fabulous public resource that it is now. So I've marked onto here the portions of this site which are proposed to be demolished in the drawing I saw in the staff report. So that's a pretty simple statement. But I don't think that all of this needs to be demolished. As I pointed out earlier, this area called Zone 2 or Group 2 includes several buildings, and they are not consistently in poor shape. Here's a view inside the Beamish Mill on the left and Building 3 on the right. Whereas there are images inside this complex of piles of wood on the floor because it has literally collapsed, you can see that this building still has internal structure that is in trouble, but is there. I think that we need to be more surgical in our approach to demolition. We need to pursue a more careful approach, which looks at how we make the site safe. There's no question we need to make the site safe. I mean, that's how this all started. But how we preserve as much material as possible for some future development along the lines that I was proposing. So how do we do that? I think, in terms of reviewing the engineer's report, in terms of looking at how we move forward, we should consider the value of certain areas and require that they be preserved, shored up, and stabilized as opposed to demolished. So if I go back to here, you can see in this proposal from October, even I had large open areas for public use. So the light blue in the middle, those are open public courtyards. And what they are is areas of the site defined by historic walls that preserve the exterior romance of the complex to the street and to the river, but recognize that certain portions of the building has to come down. Similarly, areas of building 1 would get rebuilt to serve whatever the new function is. Building 6 at the bottom, just to the right, where the area is stable or reasonably stable, it should be shored up and preserved and allowed to be redeveloped as part of usable space on the site. Building 25, I think it's, 5, sorry, in the upper right corner, green in my proposal, is an important building. It anchors the whole corner of the site, and although it's in bad condition, it's also not in Zone 2, it should be repurposed as a building because it is necessary to anchor this site, also to physically anchor the walls that we want to preserve. This scheme is very simple. There's a public component against the river. There's a commercial component to the left of the central axis, and there's an institutional component along the street. And I'm suggesting some kind of arts and crafts hub or industrial hub for startups. And again, I don't want to do my whole lecture from October, but there are lots of examples of how this is happening in the province. So finally, this is an aerial view. You can see how much is proposed to be removed. The yellow area in Zone 2 is the area that's proposed for complete demolition. So I would like to suggest a motion that council might consider with respect to the proposition of demolition. I'd like to suggest that we divide the demolition into phases. First phase would be to make the street safe, and then we move to selective demolition and retention within the balance of the site. We may need to temporarily fence off part of the river, but that doesn't disturb public motion within town along the roads. After that, we get into a phase of, as they say, selective demolition and retention. And finally, at the end of the stage, the buildings would be conserved. So I'd like to suggest a motion that council recognizes that the Fowl Factory, 121 Kevin Street, is a significant heritage resource in the municipality of Port Hope, designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The preservation of as much as possible of the historic industrial complex be preserved is important to the community. That the area of the Fowl Factory described as Block 2 in the engineer's report includes many of the earliest buildings on the property, describing the history of the development of the site from 1850 to the early years of the 20th century. That the exterior public-facing walls of Block 2, both on Cavan Street and facing the river, are important to preserve heritage attributes, the character of the site, and for incorporation in any future development and reuse facing the public realm. That the deterioration of the Block 2 area is inconsistent, and that some areas are in imminent public danger, whereas others may be reasonably stabilized. Referring to the attached drawing, which would get attached, Block 2 is inconsistent in some areas. Referring to the attached drawing for specific building numbering, because it doesn't match Block 2 as a simple block. Approval of the demolition of parts of the Block 2 are conditional on the submission of a final demolition plan. And that demolition of the facades on Cavan Street be limited to Building 1 and the first 2 bays south of that of Building 6. Demolition of the interior of Building 1 be limited to the area east to the beginning of Building 3, the historic remains of the Beamish Mill, and that the wall and the structural and exterior facades of Building 3 be stabilized, braced, jacked, or shored as required for stabilization. The remainder of Building 6, a distressed structure, and the exterior facades of Building 6 be stabilized, braced, jacked, and shored as required for safe stabilization. Demolition of Building 4 be limited to the interior structure, and that the exterior facade facing the river of Building 4 be stabilized, braced, jacked, and shored as required for stabilization and safety. And Building 27 and 29 may be demolished. And the portion stabilized have protective measures applied to reduce further deterioration, such as waterproof coping or temporary roofing. I'd also like to suggest before any work gets done, the building be properly recorded for archival purposes. Thank you very much. Sorry. I knew I only
Thank
had
you.
5 minutes, so I tried to keep it short, but
Yes, thank you very much
Yeah.
for the presentation. And I'm going to now ask council members if they have any questions for the presenter. Okay, seeing none. Oh, yes, Councillor Less.
For the presentation, Phil, and
thank you,
very
Councillor.
well done. I'd like to hold my questions regarding this until I see all the deputations and their staff report.
So would a member of council like to move and receive this item at this point for information? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Todd. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next deputation 3.2, Chris Wallace. I welcome Mr. Wallace to the podium and remind him that he has 5 minutes to make a deputation to council. Please press the button and you may begin. Thank you.
Mayor Hankowski, members of council, thank you very much for hearing me tonight. No slideshows. If I read through this, I can be quite a bit quicker. I won't need the full 5 minutes. The File Factory is not falling down. The File Factory is not a building. It's a collection of more than a dozen different buildings from different eras. One portion of one of these buildings is in serious danger of collapse and should be demolished. But this does not change the heritage status of the rest. Anyone who's been inside the building in the last 10 years or so could tell you that that particular area has been at risk for years and should have been dealt with years ago. Previous owners have done nothing, a classic case of demolition by neglect. But the municipality has also been aware of this for years, and past councils have done nothing either. While some portions of the building complex are quite solid, significant other areas are in poor shape and could become problematic in future years. It's still not too late for our current council to do something to protect these areas. Council has a clear obligation to protect the public, and since there is a danger to the public, council is quite right to order a demolition. The council also has a clear obligation to protect the property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So council must balance its two obligations. As a starting point, council should not give in to the segment of the community that wants to see everything demolished simply because they can't visualize its potential. I've always believed in the old cliche, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And much of the File Factory ain't that broke. Of course, it's not that simple. Council must carry out its due diligence, and I believe you've done so. You've had 2 structural engineers' reports, and I don't doubt that these engineers responded diligently and professionally to the question they were asked. But what question was put to them? What were they asked to do? Were they asked to recommend taking down everything that was not structurally ideal right now on the grounds that these structures have so little value? It appears that this is the question that they've addressed. Or were they asked to recommend taking down only those elements that are a clear current danger to the public and preserve the rest on the grounds that these are designated heritage structures which do have value and which by law must be preserved? Council has an obligation under the Ontario Heritage Act to ensure that the second question is asked and answered before you make your final decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. I'm going to now ask if there are any questions or comments from around the table. I think we'll make a note of your query about which question or questions were asked and hope that we can have that illuminated through the staff report and further discussion. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Moving on to our last deputation, 3.3. Yes, yes, we are going to need to receive this for information. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Mink and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? Thank you. Moving on to 3.3, Bruce Bowden on behalf of ACO Port Hope Advocacy. I welcome Mr. Bowden to the podium and remind him that he has 5 minutes to make a deputation to council. And please press, the button's pressed, so please go ahead.
I will. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll follow Chris's example and be less than 5 minutes. This is sort of just a general perspective from the community. I can't answer the detailed questions which they have raised and which you will have to consider. I've been asked to say a few words on behalf of ACO Port Hope. The fowl factory troubles Port Hope. Its rundown condition has deteriorated so that it is now a semi-ruin. It's a brick factory, and no one built factories to be beautiful. It is known to us as a single building, presenting an image on Cabin Street of one long continuous building with only 2 obvious sections. Only if you risk turning your ankles on a slippery trail across the river can you easily discern that the building is not a single entity. From external views, I had guessed it was 7. From the presentations of Robin Long and Phil Goldsmith for the library last fall at the Capitol Theatre, and if you missed it, and 220 people were at that event, well, if you missed it, you missed a happening. But until then, who knew that there were almost 20 attached sections that began with the original Beamish Mill of 1850? Be ironic indeed for this town to have taken extraordinary efforts to preserve the Beamish House and then to discard the Beamish Mill, which began this factory site. At least the facade of that section needs serious discussion whether anything of it can be preserved. And I hope you will do that and establish formal conditions and some supporting guidelines. Port Hope was an industrial town. We forget that to some extent because our industries are along Mill Street or just simply down the river with Cameco or down the lake. But it was an important industrial town in this region, one that had major exports to New York State and then on through Montreal to England and Europe. This is our only remaining large factory of that era. Files and rasps are a specialized market, and today most of us likely only have one file in our toolbox. But this building was the largest producer of them in the entire world, according to Phil's presentation last fall. Who of us can imagine the largest anything in Port Hope other than a crazy spring river festival? These buildings, therefore, are the last physical reminder of the town's industrial energy. They also live on in a time when elsewhere, all across the eastern continent, the beauty of industrial buildings has been recognized. The textile mill factories of New England, the garment factories of New York City, the brickworks of the Don Valley, the Red Path sugar silos of Toronto as a creative outdoor backdrop, the once polluted Lachine Canal of Montreal, now a major tourist attraction. Many of these rundown structures have been reoccupied, often by universities and colleges and schools, by an architecture faculty in Cambridge, Ontario, by readapting discarded arenas and armories in both Windsor and London, by making mills into crafts and art centers in Scotland, England, and the northern United States, by opening their spaces into combined indoor, outdoor public attractions. There are a lot of studies, by think tanks and by universities that have shown that the combination of relaxed sightseeing capacity amid old sites, often with ruins, creates repeated visits from afar, creates daily local use, and creates locations for energized events. So the Cabin Street face of the file factory, whatever its structural steel and cement posts are sound, should be preserved. And including, even if some of the brick has to come down, preserve the overall structure behind it. But do try to preserve as much of the brick wall portions that can be stabilized. They present an opportunity for institutional reuse. This town, as MPP, have long wanted to try to attract a trades and technology college center into this town. Well, we have the beginnings of that with Loyalist College now. And this is the most creative site that Loyalist College could ever possibly find for workshops and for educational purposes. And their students, those few that we have already, they've been a fabulous addition to this town. So despite difficulties with the site, no other site in this town offers so much to the imagination. So it's important to conserve what we can, including as portions of the Cabin Street frontage if we can. The opportunity to integrate a new building design into the old along that street could be a spectacular center for this town. The opportunity to combine indoor space with outdoor relaxation space along the river will be the highlight of our river walk. A large-scale teardown is backward thinking from the previous century. So we're going to take practical steps tonight about safety, but they need careful definition. They need follow-up. For in the file factory, Port Hope has a dramatic future, not an encumbered past. With forward public-private sector joint planning, and do remember the current owner has wished to invest in this town and has not yet walked away from it. There is no sale yet. The Ontario Heritage Act's designation clauses then achieve their intended goals. So let's use the necessities of the moment to readapt this unique heritage site.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bowden, would you like to stay here at the podium in case we have some questions for you? So I'm just going to ask fellow council members if anybody has any questions or comments. Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. So I'll need a mover and seconder to receive this for information. Moved by Councillor Todd, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Thank you very much. We'll move on now to item number 4, items for consideration. 4.1, report PS 0624, Heritage Demolition Permit Application, 121 Cabin Street, Block 2. Does staff have anything further that they would like to add before we consider this report?
Thank you, Chair. The property at 121 Cabin Street, which my friends in the audience have done a fantastic job in providing some background and historical information, I do appreciate that, is often referred to as the File Factory. It is designated heritage property under the Ontario Heritage Act. The building, including the facade, are considered heritage attributes of the property, and removing whole or part of heritage attributes on a designated property does require council approval. On February 7th of this year, municipal staff were made aware that a section of the west exterior wall of the structure had failed and bricks had fallen onto Cabin Street. Over the course of the past 4 weeks, staff have closed Cabin Street to ensure public safety of our residents due to the potential failure and collapse of that structure in that area. We've been working diligently with the owner to ensure the property is safe. Staff have obtained aerial photographs of the building, which clearly show catastrophic collapse and failure of the roof structure and internal building components in areas of the building. An unsafe building order and subsequently an emergency order under the Ontario Building Code Act have been issued to the owner to immediately address the safety concerns related to the structure, which also required the production of a structural assessment of the building, which was to be performed by a professional engineer, which was to identify the steps required to make the building safe. Staff have received a heritage permit application from the owner of the property to demolish the portion of the building, which is described as Block 2 in the structural assessment letter and the site plan prepared by LEA Consulting Limited, as it imposes an immediate safety concern to the public. Staff have the opportunity to have the owner's structural assessment peer reviewed by DM Willis Associates, who have stated in the report that in their opinion, it is an immediate public safety concern and it should be addressed and should be considered paramount. Municipal staff are conscious of the heritage values of this building and what it provides to our municipality. We will shift our focus on how to appropriately address the remaining blocks once the safety and life safety concerns related to Block 2 have been alleviated. And I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Director. Any questions or comments from the table? Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So through the chair, how do we ensure that making the existing portions safe, due diligence is being taken on the other portions that they don't accidentally come down in the process, or that there's something that we don't know that all of a sudden it happens and then we're told after the fact that, oh, because a professional said that this had to be done without coming back to council first?
So through the chair, thank you for the question. So a requirement of the demolition permit would be the fact that the work must be performed under the direct supervision of a professional engineer. The permit would be issued specifically for the work required to make the building safe related to Block 2. So that's where the permit would be issued for that specific block, and that work would be supervised by a professional engineer contracted by the owner to ensure that the work is within the scope as outlined in the permit application.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Less.
Are we into the area where we should be discussing the whole situation? Or are we just concentrating on?
I would suggest that maybe we focus on the issue at hand, but we could then broaden the discussion.
Okay, well, my question is that if we issue the demolition permit and we take down Block 2, who takes ownership of the rest of the factory if the current owner bails?
So, I mean, unfortunately, if we had to look into the future, if the owner walked away from the property, I mean, I think that could happen at any time, whether the demolition occurs or not. If the owner walked away from the property and it would subsequently fail to pay taxes, I mean, there's remedies for that where it would end up going to tax sale and eventually we may come municipal property. But I mean, that's something that we're not addressing right now.
I didn't really expect an answer, but
but thank you. Yeah, there's many steps that could and may occur. The owner has been very involved in this process. They've replied in a very timely manner to requests made by municipal staff. They've completed all tasks that we've requested of them thus far. I have confidence in their proposal and their position that they want to ensure that this building is made safe. And that is the sole scope of work that will take place upon the issuance of this permit. And we will come back to council if and when a permit is applied for the purposes of any further work to occur at the heritage site.
Councillor Todd.
Thanks very much. From a education point of view, because this will be the first time we've gone through the heritage demolition permit, it's been suggested that maybe, there's some cataloging that could be done. There's some relics inside that could be removed. if that was a condition of this, could you maybe walk us through, or is there someone at the table who can walk us through what that process looks like, how that goes about, and how that is monitored during the demolition? Just maybe some education around that piece.
Through the chair to members of council. So related to you're speaking to sort of concepts of preservation or a preservation plan or a commemoration plan or building plans that are typically attached to a heritage building when we look at it from that perspective, from a demolition perspective. And I think what the report does is it addresses, normally those things are done by a heritage professional through a heritage impact assessment report. And really what we've recommended that, recognizing that there's life-saving, there's health and safety related issues related to this particular block. Our position was we're supportive of the work that needs to be done on that block now, recognizing that any future work that would need to be done, it would require a heritage impact assessment of any kind for any kind of issue. So really what we're saying now is shore up what the health and safety issues are on the site. Before we look at any other part of that building, we would need to have a heritage impact assessment, which would give us those sort of notions as to what that plan would look like, and or is there a commemorative plan or something like that that we would need to do. That is not recommended as part of today's report. At least that's not what we put in the report today.
Okay, I'm going to just keep going around the table, so I'll go next. Going to insert myself. So I have a few questions. First is just going back a little bit. Can you explain to us, just for the purposes of understanding process, why it is that we have two engineering reports that have been presented to us? What is the purpose of that? And then secondarily, when you talked about the demolition process that would be taking place, it would be under the supervision of the owner's engineer, correct? Is there a reason why we have two separate engineers for the purposes of providing input in a report around what needs to be demolished and how, but during the process, we're only down to one engineer that's actually supervising it?
Thank you, Mayor. So the reason we have two reports is, one, the owner provided us a structural assessment, which is performed by their engineer, because it was a requirement as per the order that was issued by our building department. We took it upon ourselves to have that report peer reviewed to ensure that the opinions within the body of the owner's report were valid. Our peer review of the report, and which included a site inspection, concluded that they agreed the fact that Block 2 was an immediate risk to the public, and the measures needed to be taken, put in place to ensure the public was safe. The fact that we have a owner's engineer performing the actual supervision of the project is a requirement of the demolition permit, which may be issued. Typically, the municipality wouldn't supervise work. That's not the role of the municipality, to supervise work to ensure that it's being undertaken. While we may perform inspections to ensure compliance, we wouldn't supervise the work. So the owners would undertake that work to ensure they're in compliance with the applicable provisions of the permits which may be issued.
And my follow-up question briefly, and this is for Director Davis. You had talked about heritage impact assessment for anything beyond what we're considering this evening. I'm wondering, to what extent does that heritage impact assessment involve meaningful engagement of key stakeholders and the public in that assessment, and as well as meaningful ongoing engagement with the owner of the property?
Through back to the mayor. Heritage impact assessment it would involve, as far as I can, as best my recollection would be, and I'm not an expert in them, I'm not a heritage planner by trade or any stretch of the imagination. However, I would suggest that typically a heritage impact assessment is more of a more technical document. Mr. Goldsmith gave in his presentation, I would anticipate that the work that he did on behalf of that developer was a heritage impact assessment of some description or something related to that. It's more technical work. It involves less engagement with the public, certainly, but certainly engagement with the owner. So it's much the same as an engineering study. They would do, and I don't want to talk about any other heritage files today, because I think this is a weighty enough matter. But in other situations where we've had a heritage impact assessment done, usually that is done by the building owner in support of whatever activity they wish to do, whether if it's demolished a building, they'll do an assessment of that and provide that to the municipality. And much like we got a peer review to peer review the engineering work that would be done, the municipality often would get a peer reviewer to peer review the heritage impact assessment to ensure that it is keeping the interests of the heritage community and the municipality at the forefront.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I also have two questions. The first kind of picks up on the mayor's questions about oversight of the demolition. And I think, I share the concern that she was raising, because when you read the engineer report that was provided by the property owner, it reads very differently, I think, than some of the conclusions in the peer review engineer's report. And that, to me, raises the question about whether the structural engineer engaged by the property owner sees heritage value. The peer review report suggests that there was no heritage lens used by that structural engineer in preparing the report. And if you look at the illustration included in that report, in fact, all buildings on the site are labeled as for future demolition. So if an engineer is going into a demolition project with the thought that this whole site will eventually be demolished, that's a very different mindset than somebody being on site supervising an order that has heritage concerns and that is based on preserving as much as possible. So I think, I hear, the mayor's concerns. And I also, I just wanted to ask the question about Section E of the peer review report by Wills, which does say that it is unclear, based on the assessments completed, that the entirety of Block 2 must be demolished immediately. So while recognizing that work needs to be done to ensure health and safety, I don't think our peer review actually agrees with the conclusion that demolition is what is needed in the immediate term. We, of course, don't have any other information or any other engineering opinion to base that on in terms of what that might look like if not demolition. But I do see enough discrepancy between our peer review and the original report to raise some question, which makes me a little bit nervous about proceeding and whether we are in fact would be in fact getting into a situation where decisions are subsequently made by engineers who don't agree or don't have that heritage perspective.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So through the chair, again, this report was generated based on an emergency order, which was issued under the Ontario Building Code Act, because we were dealing with an imminent threat of building collapse. Okay, so I want to bring us back to the fact that we're dealing with public safety. We're dealing with ensuring that our residents are safe. We're dealing with, unfortunately, we still have individuals who trespass on that property on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And the concern that we have people that are trespassing that may be inside of this building when the state that it's in concerns me, and it should concern everyone. You are correct. The fact that a heritage impact assessment, and it's very clear in the owner's engineering report, was not conducted. Right, they were there to perform a structural assessment for the purposes of compliance with an emergency order to make this building safe. Absolutely. Could we make a request to have our engineer on site to perform site assessment of the work being done? Absolutely. My response originally, that's something that's not regularly done. Could we ask to have it done? Yes, we could. The scope of the work and it would be limited to the permit. Again, it's for block 2 to make that building safe. And if a requirement of the issuance of that permit is to ensure that we have an independent engineer on site as well, to address concerns related to public safety or the remaining sections of the building, we can definitely address that as well.
My second question is about timeline. So if the permit were issued today, what would be your expectation around timelines for when work would proceed and when we would be likely to see Cabin Street reopened?
Thank you. The order underneath the Ontario Building Code Act actually requires for immediate remedy. So that's actually in the prescribed form. Right now, since the first sections of that wall have failed, we've been over a month, unfortunately, to conduct all the work that we've done leading up to this date. It's taken us that period of time. If and when the permit is granted, the issuance, first of all, we would be looking at issuing the demolition permit in conjunction with the heritage permit. Then the ball would be in the owner's court. I know that they've been more than willing to comply with what we've asked for. So I would be making a request with our chief building official that work commence as soon as practical so that we can not only make that building safe, but that we can open up Cabin Street and the other impacts to our municipality that we know are all associated with having the situation we're all facing right now.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Mink, did you have a?
Yes, thank you. So just two more questions. And I do agree with the comments that have been made so far, as well as the comment I think it was Chris Wallace made about the approach, the question asked, how is this, what was the question that they were asked? And when they're doing the demolition, will the question be asked public safety, which is absolutely important. But when you look at the entire site, you could argue it's unsafe, the entire site. Nothing meets current building code. So I would feel comfortable if approaching this demolition, there was wording saying public safety as well as retention, because I think without that word of retention, it could be argued the entire site is not safe. The question I have is regarding Float Your Fanny. Is there any risk of that building and the current event coming up for Float Your Fanny? We're talking about the street side, but the river side, is there a risk there?
So thank you. So through the chair, just to address your first point, retention, I just would like to clarify that first of all, because again, we'd be talking about making the building safe, and the order was simply to make the building safe, to eliminate the hazards. Nowhere was the order say we need to demolish block 2. The demolition of the structure based on the structural assessment of the owner's engineer, which is peer reviewed by ours, deemed that demolition would be a remedy to ensure that structure is made safe, right? So I want to be that very clear, right? So secondly, in relation to Float Your Fanny, if Cabin Street was to remain closed and the building was to remain unsafe as we're dealing with it now, it would have impacts on Float Your Fanny, absolutely. And I don't want to get into the specific details, but we can talk. Obviously, we would have Cabin Street, which is main artery, utilized for that event. We'd have an unsafe building in the heart of the event. The south lot on the south side of the structure is utilized for the purposes of staging for emergency response vehicles, which we wouldn't be able to utilize. There's a number of things we would need to address if we wanted to have this event continue while we're dealing with this particular matter. So.
Thank you, Director. At this point, I would like to turn the chair over to the Deputy Mayor. Oh, is there one more question? Yes, Councillor Less.
Yeah. I want us all to be on the same page on this, both those in the audience, the delegations, and ourselves, that our Director Williams has stated that both firms have agreed that Block 2 has to be demolished. Has to be demolished. Is that what you are saying?
So through the chair, just in relation to your question, demolition of block 2 is a recommendation made by the engineers. so that's in response to the orders that were issued to them to make the building safe. So that's what they've come up with, is to demolish that section of the building because of the inherent risk it has to collapse. So demolition is the remedy that they've chosen, and that remedy we had peer reviewed. And again, they also identify block 2 as immediate risk to the public. So demolition is what they proposed in their application for the demolition permit.
Thank you for clarifying that. Now, would the 3 delegates that presented agree with block 2 having to be demolished? Because that's what I seem to have heard from all 3 of you. Sure, come on up.
I'm going to ask the clerk in terms of the procedural flexibility here.
It is subject to the ruling of the chair. However, under the current procedure bylaw, the deputation is the opportunity for the public to provide feedback. And then other than that, there is really no other opportunity as part of the council meeting to do that. But it's subject to the ruling of the chair.
Okay, well, in this instance, I will allow a 1-minute response to this.
Do you agree that with the statement that block 2 should be demolished for safety reasons?
Sorry, I forgot to turn that on. The answer to that is no, not necessarily. I think Mr. Williams confirmed that the question was about making the site safe. There are other ways to make the site safe other than total demolition. So what I was proposing was partial demolition, selectively in areas of total collapse, but retention, shoring, bracing, jacking to support key elements of the site for future incorporation in, a development. Once they're gone, they're gone. So certainly the cheapest, easiest, engineered-centric way of dealing with the safety would be demolition, no question. But that's not the only answer.
Yes, I'll, Councillor List, do you want to have a follow-up from that answer? Okay. Okay, yep, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just also, to be clear, it is not actually explicitly stated in the peer review report that block 2 does need to be demolished. In fact, it says on page 3 at the top, it is unclear based on current assessments that the entirety of block 2 must be demolished. So raising the question that there could be other solutions, but we're not actually presented with what those other solutions are from an engineering perspective.
Any other? Yes, yes, Director.
Just to clarify a couple of those points. So in relation to comments both from the deputy mayor and from members of the public, again, this is to deal with the immediate safety concern within the body of the report, and then also at the conclusion of my opening statement. The heritage value of this building is not in question. I think we all realize what it offers to our community. I think we need, when we're looking at life safety, and we have to look at the immediate threat to the potential collapse. But when it comes to block 2, once block 2 is made safe, and block 2 has been signed off by a professional engineer that it is safe, then we will then perform the additional work required to ensure that not only the heritage attributes and features through the heritage impact assessment are taken into consideration, but that work will stop at block 2. And because of the structure, and I'm not an engineer, but because of the construction of the way that the building is composed, the reshoring and the retention of the existing structure to make sure that it's safe will likely have to occur. Because we have to remember, we're basically taking the center section out of the building, and now we're going to be left with the remaining sections, which may require retention, shoring, those type of things, because there's not going to be work permitted to be performed in those adjacent blocks until additional permits are issued, which is going to require heritage impacts assessments, heritage permit applications, so forth. So I just want to be very clear that the work is limited to block 2, and any additional work will have to come back to council, and there's a lot of work that would have to take place for any additional work to actually occur at that location.
Councillor Todd.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm not losing the narrative a little bit here, because we talk about the risk of block 2 and the risk in block 2, and those seem to be two different things. Like, the risk exists in block 2, but the risk is not all of block 2. Am I reading that right? I'm looking at the report that we've put forward from the emergency to comply. The risk is in block 2, not necessarily block 2. Am I reading that right?
The imminent risk of block 2 is the west exterior wall, which has already failed, and that is the immediate risk to Cabin Street. A large percentage of block 2 has already collapsed and failed. It has already failed. So when it says, and to get to, and I actually wanted to clarify that point, when it says that further assessment wasn't able to be performed, it's because that structure is actually collapsed, right? So that structure wasn't accessed by engineers because the entire thing has suffered catastrophic failure in that isolated area. The roof structure has failed.
Has our building inspector gone in there to assess it, and was it given any consideration to remove the rest of it?
Thank you, through the chair. Our chief building official and our deputy and our building officials actually in the audience today have attended the site. They've entered the portions of the building which have been deemed safe. They have not entered block 2 because it is not safe to do so. They have not been in proximity to block 2 because it's not safe to be in proximity to that block. So absolutely none of the engineers have been in block 2. Our building officials have not been on block 2. And I've kept members of the public away from block 2 by fencing off Cabin Street for a month because it is unsafe to be in that area.
Thank you.
Councillor Mink.
So through the chair, once all the requirements are done to address the collapse and make that area safe, and let's say there's shoring and stabilization that's done, what are the next steps to make sure that this continues to be addressed and that the next council isn't here addressing the next collapse? What do we have as a municipality to enforce that?
So through the chair, I think your questions are the next steps that the owner may take. The owner may make further application for heritage permits to undertake alteration or additional work that has to be carried out to either further develop that property, to further perform any type of alteration work or heritage permits required. So that would be the first step in any type of work that would be required. And then upon the issuance of a heritage permit, either a further demolition or building permit may be subsequently issued depending on the nature and scope of work that the owner wants to undertake. So the ball would really be in the owner's court for any work. So once a building is safe, the building department, the orders would be satisfied at this particular moment. And then it would be up to the owner to trigger any further development or action or building until, or if the required involvement of the building department because of something else triggers a requirement for us to attend because something else becomes unsafe or a concern to the public.
Yes, go ahead.
So just to follow up, I think a concern of the community is that we do have buildings that fall to the state because of neglect. And there is that concern saying, why doesn't the municipality do something more before it gets to the state? So can you confirm that it's just a matter of us sitting and waiting and hoping that the property owner does something, or can we do more?
Thank you, through the chair. Earlier this year, I brought forward a draft property standards bylaw to council for consideration, which has been sent out for public consultation for over the past month. I received a number of comments from the members of the public, and I thank you for that. One very important aspect of inclusion that was added to the property standards bylaw was the heritage preservation provisions, which we did not previously have. Since I've been here, I've realized the importance of heritage to this community. And I wanted to incorporate that in our current property standards bylaw. So if that property standards bylaw is adopted by council, hopefully in the next couple of months, the owners of that property would be held accountable and to the standards of that property standards bylaw, which would include heritage provisions.
Thank you for that clarification. I think that's a really important point. I'm going to go with Councillor Adam and then back to you, Councillor Less.
Thank you. I just have a question. Equipment. So let's say that demolition happens. I'm not saying it's going to, but let's say it does happen. I would assume it's pretty large equipment that comes in. Are we worried about our municipal asset of Cavan Street being damaged, knowing that there is a river that runs right underneath that area, right through Block 2 as well?
So through the chair, thank you for the question. So again, part of the demolition permit, so they would have to come up with a demolition plan, which would be prepared by a engineer, and that plan would be overseen by the direct supervision of that engineer on site, which would incorporate the way in which that the work is being carried out. I believe that they will be looking to utilize our municipal lot on the south side of the structure for the purposes of staging, which will provide them additional room to store such equipment, such as excavator or whatever required equipment may be needed. So the use of our municipal lot is something we've been working with our Parks, Recreation and Culture Department with to ensure that proper permits are also obtained by the owner so they can utilize that property for those specific purposes.
And with the river that runs right below Block 2 that kind of comes through Cavan Street and then feeds up into that little like pond type thing there, weight bearing, like we're not worried about the weight of the equipment right there? I just want to make sure.
So when the demolition plan is developed, obviously the weight capacity, soil conditions, and a variety of different aspects related to how the work will be performed safely will be part of the demolition plan, which will be overseen by the engineer. So now that that concern has been raised, our chief building official is present. We'll ensure that that aspect of the work plan is included.
And going back to Councillor Less.
Yes, well, two things that Mr. Goldsmith said right at the beginning really concerned me. One, that the brickworks was reinstituted based on millions of dollars of donations raised in Toronto. And secondly, it could not be profitable. So it begs the question that at what point does a responsible owner get responsible and say enough, and then what happens? So I get what's next. Rhetorical.
Director, did you want to comment on the rhetorical, either question or comment?
No.
I'm going to ping to, if you don't mind, just insert because it's a little bit along the lines of this and also just coming back to the bylaw under consideration at the moment. What kind of teeth does that bylaw have in terms of holding property owners into account that own heritage buildings in our municipality?
Thank you for the question. So under the proposed property standards bylaw with the heritage provisions, there's a number of enforcement mechanisms that are available to our building officials and our municipal law enforcement officers, starting obviously with education. We always want to bring someone to compliance. If a compliance cannot be obtained, orders will be issued underneath the Ontario Building Code for a contravention of the property standards provisions of this particular maybe heritage aspects of it. If those orders are not satisfied, so for an example, if an order was issued to repair a certain item, a timeline would be provided, and hopefully the owner would undertake that repair work. If that work was not undertaken, that individual could be charged and brought in front of the provincial courts underneath the Provincial Offences Act. The municipality could undertake the work Right now, up to $50,000, we would be able to undertake the work, and anything above $50,000 where we'd contract the services of a third-party vendor to perform the required work. We'd come back to council for approval above $50,000. So those are some of the remedies where we would ensure that the heritage provisions would be taken care of. So it would be education, it would be enforcement through orders, potential prosecution, and then the municipality could undertake the work, and those charges would then be put on the owner's tax roll.
Thank you for that clarification. Very helpful. Councillor Todd.
Follow-up question on public safety. Should demolition go through, it's often spoken of that that building has contaminant industrial waste in there. What's the plan that in the event that that goes forward, that that is contained and we're not going to cause any problems?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. As part of the conversations with the owner, we've actually requested that a designated substance report be prepared. That report was actually prepared prior to this occurring. They've been very forthcoming and provided that report. Block 2, the area of concern, has been identified that does not contain the building materials, do not contain any designated substances that are of concern. So that's a good thing, because not only is it going to expedite the actual work that is required to take place, but that designated substance report and the work associated with this doesn't have to take place because they've already undertaken that.
And what about beneath the surface, outside of the materials themselves?
Through the chair, the demolition permit is for the structure in itself, not for the removal of any soil. That would require additional permits which are not part of this permit application. PHAI has been made aware that the work is taking place, and they've actually made a request to be on site when the work is taking place to ensure that any soil is not removed from the site.
Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, this is less of is partly a rhetorical question, maybe a slight vent that you've heard before. When do we have the conversations about how we move forward with projects like this, with issues like the File Factory and so many others, where the only time we seem to talk about them in this chamber is when we are on a time-sensitive matter where we really don't have a lot of options to deal with because we are reacting to something that is happening to us or is being, requested of us in a time-sensitive manner. When do we have those conversations as a council, as a community, as a municipality about where we want to go and how we get there proactively, strategically, so that we're not just making decisions on the fly when we're, up against the wall with this kind of time pressure? We clearly have a community that is passionate about heritage and about heritage architecture. The room is full tonight. I've never seen so many people watching the live stream on YouTube as this evening's meeting. We have so many smart people, volunteers dedicating countless hours to the preservation of our heritage, and yet we don't seem to be able to do it. This is the second time in this short council's term that we are facing this kind of situation, but it's been decades and decades in the making. I mean, it's been almost 50 years since this building was designated, and we don't seem to be any closer to a solution. So I guess not really a question, but just again, this an expression, I think, of frustration, of feeling a little bit disempowered in this seat of, meager power, I guess, where we have to make tough decisions, but don't seem to get an opportunity to get out ahead of these things and be strategic and proactive about our future.
Would CAO.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. A couple of things. One, I'm assuming that the Deputy Mayor is putting that forward, although rhetorically, to municipal staff, but ultimately, as councillors, you have a role to play as well. You have the mechanism through notice of motion. If you would like to put forward a notice of motion at a future meeting or down the road, or you have a strategic plan coming up for consideration and deliberation, if you'd like to highlight those items as a strategic outcome. And I caution you as to how you put forward that direction and what that looks like, and the implications of that as a whole, which we can get into a deeper conversation. but it doesn't always require staff bringing forward the plan. As the elected officials for the community, you have the opportunity to direct us and to tell us as to what you would like to see and when you would like to see it. And we will put a plan forward and put it in front of you in order to deliberate it and consider it on a topic. Obviously, that hasn't happened in decades past. And obviously, we are here dealing with legacy files because unfortunately, no steps were taken previous to this evening, and staff has been put in the uncomfortable position in bringing forward a staff report and speaking to structural engineers to try to ensure that you have all the information that you need in order to make an educated decision for the life safety of the community. As staff, that is our job, that is our role, which differs slightly from your role, as you know, as the elected officials for the municipality. But hopefully, as we move forward through the remainder of your term, if that is highlighted as something you would like to see staff tackle, obviously the property standards bylaw is coming forward. It is still in draft form. Exactly the scope of the heritage section of that bylaw is still under draft because you got to take into consideration the scope of that bylaw. So do we have a bylaw that we're going to enact that can cost a property owner millions and millions of dollars, or we're going to put you in a position where we're in a court case and we're legally fighting and spending tax dollars with a property owner in order to ascertain and gain ownership of that building? Or was the intent of that bylaw to try to ensure to not clean those property legacy files up, but to ensure we don't get another one? Was really, I think, from the staff's perspective as to what it is we were trying to focus on and accomplish. Let's not create another file factory in Port Hope. Let's put some mechanisms in place to assist the property owners so that they're taking it off in achievable bites. If we take this bylaw and try to apply it fulsome against a property such as the file factory, I don't know if necessarily that's the full intent of the bylaw. But staff, when we bring it forward in its final form, after we take into consideration the environmental and the accessibility committee comments, and as well as, I believe, about 60 comments from the public, then you'll be able to deliberate that and take a hard look as to what you would like to look like as for the community as a whole.
Thank you for that answer. So I'm going to do what I wanted to do a few minutes ago, which is ask the deputy mayor to chair, because I know that we do have a motion recommended action in front of us, and in light of the conversation we've had today, I'd like to make a friendly amendment back to the conversation we were having about who's going to be at the site for any kind of demolition. I'm a huge fan of peer review processes. Comes from my background, and I think if we're saying that peer review is really good for staff reports, if we're saying peer review is really good for the preparation of heritage impact assessments, then I'd like to see a municipal engineer on site with the property owner's engineering during any process of demolition for Block 2. I'm not sure how to put that language in there in a way that will be clear. And I don't know if it's beyond the action that you're asking of us here this evening, but I would also like to make a friendly motion to add to this action that any future decisions regarding the file factory have in place an appropriate engagement process in place, including with the owners, and not limited to just what Director Davis was saying was a heritage impact assessment, but something that would be more fulsome, and that would speak to some of the concerns that have been raised by the Deputy Mayor and others during our conversation today. So not sure if there's a clean and simple way of putting that, but in a sense, I'd like the demolition to be peer reviewed by a municipal engineer. And I'm not sure if we need to put explicitly into this recommended motion, this commitment or this direction, that we would like any future decisions beyond what you're asking us to approve today to actually have developed an appropriate engagement process with the public with the owners that would also include but not be limited to a heritage impact assessment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm looking at the clerk for some suggested language on that motion before asking for a seconder. Sorry, not on the motion, on the friendly amendment to the motion.
We will need some more specific wording from the. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. In this case, an amendment to the motion would require a mover and seconder to the motion that is would be on the floor, which would be the recommended action. And then the mayor would have to provide some specific wording with respect to the amendment that she would want to bring forward. I caught some of what she was saying there, but I think that it would be useful to have some specific wording with respect to the amendment that she would want to bring forward. That amendment would need to be seconded. The amendment would be voted on first, and then the original motion would then be voted on. Thank you.
Thank you for that direction. I'm actually going to turn to Director Williams because I do want to make sure that we have the exact language here, because the action really just speaks of an issuance of a heritage permit for the demolition of Block 2, but it doesn't actually really address who's going to be on site supervising that action. So would you be able to suggest some wording that would reflect the fact that there is the engineer that would be there as a representative of the property owners, but also that there would be an engineer representing the municipality of Port Hope during that process?
Thank you, through the chair. Those provisions would be a requirement of the demolition permit. So we would not issue the demolition permit unless those caveats were in place. So number one, that a demolition plan was formulated and prepared and submitted to our department, that a engineer was on site to perform the supervision of that work. So that would be a requirement of the demolition permit already. If we wanted to add the additional caveat to the recommendation that a second engineer be present during the course of the demolition to ensure compliance with applicable permits, or we could work on the wording, or to ensure compliance with. What would you suggest?
Also, just there, compliance with it, keeping other parts of the building intact.
Yeah, I think if we just left it just to ensure that.
Can we actually specify very clearly the terms and conditions as specified by council for the role of that additional engineer on site?
So I think, looking at the clerk now, I think what the mayor is suggesting that the amendment to the motion would be that we approve the heritage demolition permit subject to the following terms and conditions, being that a municipally identified.
Okay, so that is the ask, but I'm just asking for the wording to make sure that we're actually achieving that goal, and it's not just what is already as part of the conditions of a demolition permit. So I understand what you're saying about who is on site, including somebody from the municipality, but what I'm asking for is an additional person there that can bear witness and provide direction or whatever the role is of the engineer to begin with on site, to make sure that we have yet another set of eyes on the decisions that are being made.
Councillor Ming?
So with that said, when I'm looking at, I think this is the demolition, is it not the demolition permit that I'm looking at here that's included? The application. Okay, so it says here on the second page that under 4, scope of work, demolition of Block 2 as per the attached site plan. So that's a very broad statement. So I think the discussion we had is that we're not necessarily asking for all of Block 2 to be demolished. So even though we may have a second person on site, we're still asking for all of Block 2 to be demolished. Is that correct?
But the whole purpose of having that additional person on site, going back to the discussion about what is the balance between public safety and heritage, that we have somebody on site that actually is there with a commitment to the heritage value of the property, so that becomes a balancing and another person bearing witness to what's happening.
I'm gonna, sorry. I think I'm gonna, I'm looking to the clerk. I think we're starting to discuss the motion, but I think it would be best to have the wording agreed to, and then we can have a seconder, and then we can discuss and vote on that amendment. Sure, Councillor Todd. I'm going to go to Councillor Todd for a minute first.
And mine's a clarifying question for the mayor. Is the intention of what you're asking to ensure only Block 2 comes down, not beyond, or only as much of Block 2 as is necessary?
That's a terrific question. Definitely the former would be part of what I would like to ensure. But it seems to me from what Director Williams was saying that this demolition order is only for the parts of Block 2 that are a safety concern, because there's parts of it that have already been compromised. No.
No, so yeah, so through the chair, so we have to define it as well. The application that you have in front of you is the heritage permit application, not the demolition permit application. So actually two different permit processes. So we would not issue a demolition permit until a heritage permit was issued. So that's what we're here discussing, the heritage permit. The heritage permit application is requesting the demolition of Block 2 in its entirety.
So would you like to comment on that? Because I'm going to say something more about that. No, I think the purpose is to make sure that, as was talked about earlier, and I believe Councillor Rink brought it up first, that this doesn't become an automatic domino effect into different parts of the file factory, and that there's nobody there that necessarily can bear witness to that, or to come back I mean, I know that it would come back from the council table, but just to have an additional safeguard in place. So that is first and foremost a concern for me for making this proposal.
So thank you for that. So maybe a recommendation is that a municipally contracted engineer be on site to ensure the provisions of a demolition permit issued for 121 Cavan Street, specifically Block 2, are adhered to. Something along those lines. And we'd also have, the engineer could speak to the actual structural assessment of the work while it's fluid, while it's actually occurring, to ensure that not only that the structure is safe, but it does not go beyond the scope of the permit that is issued. We would also have our municipal building officials who be present, again, not supervising the work, but ensuring compliance with the permit, which was limited to Block 2. So the work that would not be oversought, but that would be periodically inspected by our building officials will also ensure compliance. So we do have that safeguard of our building officials ensuring compliance with the permit. But we'd actually have now, as per your request, a municipally contracted engineer on site to assist with the oversight and supervision of that work to ensure compliance with the actual demolition plan and the provisions of the permit.
So I think that's a good starting place for the motion, and maybe we can consider it and open it for discussion and see if there's any other additions or revisions that we might consider. But I think we need to get it on and I'm not chairing anymore, so you are chairing.
Well, we're kind of co-chairing, it seems. Deferring to the clerk, I think, would you like to take a 5-minute recess? That will give some opportunity to hone on the wording. So let's take a 5-minute recess. Okay, if everybody can take their seats, we're reconvening, and I'm going to go straight to Mayor Alana for the wording of her amendment.
So this is the amended action. I'm just on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to just turn my body sideways so I can read it out. Whereas Council considered report PS 0624 regarding the heritage demolition permit application 121 Cavan Street, Block 2, and whereas the issuance of the heritage demolition permit for this property aligns with the recommendations of a structural assessment report provided by the owner and peer reviewed by the municipality through DM Wills and Associates, and whereas the subject property on Block 2 of 121 Cavan Street poses immediate safety concerns. Now therefore be it resolved that Council approve the issuance of a heritage permit for the demolition of Block 2 of the structure at 121 Cavan Street as identified in Attachment 4 of PS 0624. And further, that staff be directed to include provisions in the heritage permit that a municipally contracted engineer be authorized to supervise the demolition in order to ensure compliance with the provisions of the demolition permit issued for Block 2, with a commitment to ensure that the demolition does not exceed the immediate threat to public safety as determined by a municipally contracted structural engineer.
Thank you, Mayor Alana. And just to be clear, right now, we are talking only about the amendment, which is the last paragraph. No,
Madam Chair. So because the amendment was worked on, we haven't removed the full motion. So this is now the full motion that is being presented to council for their consideration. So the recommended action was on the agenda.
Yeah.
And then we had some discussions.
Oh, it wasn't moved yet. I
Yeah, it
see what
wasn't
you mean.
moved yet,
Okay,
yeah.
so
So
we
now
are
this-
replacing this. So instead of moving the recommended motion, Mayor Alana is not amending that. She is putting
Moving
forward a
this.
new motion.
That's
So we
right.
do need a seconder. Is there
Yes.
seconded by Councillor Adam?
Perfect. Thank you.
Any discussion?
Thank you. I actually have one friendly amendment I would like to make. It's in the third whereas. And whereas elements of the subject property on Block 2 poses immediate safety concerns.
Is there a seconder for that friendly amendment? Seconded by Mayor Alana. Any discussion about the friendly amendment? Councillor Mink?
Thank you. So I just want to confirm that Block 2, what we're including in the permit, where it says demolition of Block 2, we're talking about Building 3, which includes Beamish Mill, Building 4, 27, 29, and 6. So that's that entire, all of those buildings would be demolished, even though there is somebody there, because the permit says the demolition of.
So, Mayor Alana, would you like to clarify?
Yes, the wording has changed so that it is only limited, so that the demolition does not exceed immediate threat to public safety as determined by a municipally contracted structural engineer. So we're going to have additional oversight at the site to ensure that only those parts of Block 2 with imminent public safety are demolished.
At this point, we do have amendment that's been moved and seconded. Is there, before we speak to the whole motion, is there any other discussion about the amendment specifically?
So this says to me that wholesale demolition of Block 2 is not going to occur.
Is what the this motion says. It says it could, but not unless that it's not to exceed the imminent safety risk.
Does staff agree with that? And all parties agree that that's what that says?
I agree with what that amendment says. I agree that's what it says on the screen. My issue being is that no engineer, the owners or ours, no building official from our chief building official to our junior building official has actually been in block 2 due to the nature of the collapse. So to say broadly that the immediate threat be posed, I think what you're looking for is you're going to deal with that west wall and then stop there, right? Realistically, no one has been block 2. We've contracted drone footage to be performed to perform a visual assessment, and that drone footage has been utilized. And that drone footage is what the engineers are basing on the catastrophic failure of the roof and interior structure. That poses a safety risk. We can't just leave that the way that it is. Again, I'm not an engineer. I'm the one performing the structural assessment. But once that immediate risk to Cavan Street, I agree that western wall is the immediate risk to Cavan Street. But the remaining sections of block 2 that have collapsed and failed are also a public safety risk, and they have to be rectified. So the recommendations of their engineers are the demolition of block 2. So this is limiting to, so if they remove the western wall of block 2, which is on Cavan Street, and they are performing that work and they encounter other areas of block 2 they haven't been able to see before, and they identify other risks, are we then required to come back for another permit?
Sorry. I think that my read of that, Director Williams, is that so long as the municipally engaged structural engineer agrees that there is a safety risk, then that work would proceed, but that the directive is that no demolition should take place beyond what poses a health and safety risk to the public.
Okay.
Any further discussion about, I just want to make sure that we're closing off on the amendment put forward by Councillor Todd. About any further discussion on that?
So, thank you. So through the chair, I am still not feeling comfortable when I see the heritage permit application form, which is, this is a form, and I'm seeing a motion up here, and then we now need the permit filled out, the demolition permit. I don't see the connections between all of this. What I'm seeing right now is that entire block 2 is going to come down. That's what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing how this motion is going to translate into that permit to protect features that can be protected while maintaining safety. I just don't see the connection. My gut is telling me all of that is coming down. I don't think when they're on site, they're going to be looking at this motion the same way we're discussing it right now.
I'm gonna ask to come back to that in a second. Could we vote on the small wording amendment that was moved and seconded so that we're all looking at the final wording, and then we can discuss the motion as a whole? Is there any other discussion about the amendment?
So, Madam
Yeah.
Chair, so the amendment that was made by Councillor Attridge and then seconded by Mayor Alana was that the main motion be amended by adding the words "elements of" before subject property in the third whereas clause. Is that
Correct.
okay? Thank you.
Yeah. Can we call a vote on that? All in favor? All opposed? It's carried. Now we can come back to your questions about the body of the motion as a whole. Do you have some suggested, do you want to bring forward an amendment to make that more clear, or to make you feel like it's going to achieve the objective?
Well, I guess it's just the understanding of the process. So you've got this. I'm hearing Director Williams saying the entire block 2 is unsafe. I'm hearing up here at the council table, there's been discussion about only the areas that are of collapse. How does this translate to the person standing there on site saying, yes, that feature has to go and this one doesn't? That's my question.
Director Williams?
So again, in relation to the process in itself, the application you have is for the heritage permit, and that heritage permit is required for any alteration work. If we want to change out windows on heritage buildings, if we want to demolish a heritage building. So that heritage permit can have provisions that you're outlining here in the body of the heritage permit. Until that heritage permit is satisfied, a demolition permit will not be issued. So the clauses and provisions of the heritage permit must be satisfied before the demolition permit is issued. Now, while during the work as outlined in the provisions of the heritage permit and the demolition plan to comply with the heritage permit, items or situations are found to be unsafe, then that work would be undertaken to ensure that building is safe, which may include further demolition within Block 2 of those particular areas. The work is going to be undertaken. If you take a look at the diagram of blocks 5 and 25 and blocks 15, so basically the blocks to the north and blocks to the south, there is going to be, we're talking about retention and shoring work. There's going to have to be work to ensure that those blocks are structurally stable, because the permit doesn't expand to those blocks. So when Block 2 is made safe, additional blocks remain structurally sound until further work commences. Now, while they're performing the work, and I think this gets to your point, while they're performing the work to make the building safe, you're looking for provisions for in relation to heritage. Because of the situation at hand, the immediate threat to public safety, right now, we're asking for this work to be performed so that our residents and the public are safe, that the building is made safe, right? That hasn't been taken into consideration. There hasn't been a heritage impact report specifically done for Block 2 because of the state and condition that it's in and the risk that it poses to the community. The work will stop once the risk is eliminated, and all of those steps will be put in place before any other additional work takes place at that location.
Councillor Todd?
My questions for Councillor Mink on clarification. Is the disconnect the fact that in the application itself, under the scope, it says demolition of Block 2? Is that part of it?
So the chair, so partially, so under 4, scope of work, demolition of Block 2, and then under 6, description of potential impacts to heritage attributes is non-applicable. So in reading the reports, it's clear that when you look at the aerial pictures, the front part of building 3, you can see that it's collapsing. When you look at the street, you can see how it's bowing out and the parapet's gone. You can see that. But when you look at Beamish Mill, it looks very different. And the reviews say that it may not all be structurally in collapse or disrepair. So while we're approving Block 2 right now, that has, according to this, there's no applicable heritage attributes, it's all going to be gone. Even like I understand what you're trying to say with this motion, but knowing reality and seeing how these things play out, I see it gone.
I'm going to take liberty to respond, though. I think, though, I don't know that we should be getting too hung up on the wording of the applicant in their application. That's what they have asked us for. That's not necessarily what we're giving them. And so I think we should be focusing on making sure that the wording of our resolution reflects our intent from this table this evening. And that will supersede what they have asked for in an application form. I think. Carolina?
Anyway, yes, I think that just reflecting, obviously, Councillor Mink, on what you're saying, and to me, this just begs again the larger discussion about how we got here, what we can do, as the CAO was saying, in terms of the future with new bylaws and new safety measures that we're going to be putting in place so that we don't wind up in this spot. But given where we are now and the reality of it, is this the best that we can do in terms of a revision of what's in front of us to ensure that things don't go beyond what they need to go, but knowing that it may not, at the end of the day, make a difference is what, if I hear you correctly in what you're saying. At least we are on the record in stating very clearly that we don't want the demolition to occur in a way that exceeds the immediate threat to public safety.
Can I ask a point of order? Given that the motion has been tabled, it's the mayor's motion, but it's already now been tabled. Can she take back chair? No, I have to keep that. Okay. CAO White.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just want to circle back to Councillor Mink's concern because I think she has a valid point, and I think there needs to be a commitment made by municipal staff as far as the motion states that a municipally contracted structural engineer will be on site. So it is the job of the staff to ensure that the direction of council is appropriately and adequately communicated to the person that we retain, that this is the intent. This is why you're on site, because we're paying someone, and this is outside of the traditional norm. So this is an extra step that council's taking that traditionally we would not take by supervising this type of work on private property outside of a traditional inspection program. So with this extra step, we are paying someone to be there for every minute of the work to ensure that it's made safe. We're not going to hire that person to be on site and pay them for all of that time without them having a clear understanding of the purpose as to why they're there. And the purpose as to why they're there is to follow council's direction as under, because this word is going to have to be applied into any permitting. Like, this is the scope that's been approved. So essentially that's what we're going to take, but with no guarantees, because none of us sitting here knows what that endpoint's going to be beyond the west wall. Is it just the west wall? Will it be all of block 2? Will it be 50%, 25%, 75%? Nobody here knows that answer, but I think by taking that step and having that commitment on site and having that clearly communicated as the intent, I think you've made a conscious step forward to preserve as much of block 2 as can be preserved for life safety provisions. And then outside of that, we're dealing with an emergency situation this evening. And then outside of that, the future blocks and the future of the file factory will be determined at a later date when we can follow more inclusive steps. I hope that helps.
Marilena?
And just to follow up, I think that really what I'm coming down to in terms of my decision making and the motion that I put forward with the friendly amendment is this is as good as we can do at this stage, but really understanding that anything moving into the future will have engagement process and additional decision making. But we didn't get here overnight. This has been years and years in the making.
Can I ask a follow-up question to you, Councillor Mink? Is there a potential amendment language to the be now therefore be it resolved statement that might help you feel more comfortable that we're being clear? Like something around the demolition of block 2 of the structure as required to address the immediate safety risk? So that we're being very clear that we're not saying yes to the whole thing if the whole thing is not required?
Yes, so I guess what I'm asking for is that clarity, that it's very specific, because how direction can be interpreted could be very broad. So that, as you had suggested, I think that gives more clarity, but I would just like to be very specific.
Marilena, and then Councillor Todd.
So just going back to the CAO's comments and Councillor Mink's wanting to drive down to more clarity, how much more clarity do we need in this motion for the staff to be very clear about what the intent is of this council?
I don't think I need additional wording to be clearer on what council's intent and direction is, unless you're wanting to know what that stop point is within block 2 that we need the structural engineer to tell us throughout once we start the process. And I don't know if that's what you're asking for additional clarity to know that point, because we're not going to be able to achieve that this evening to put that in the motion. That's a fluid process. I personally don't require any additional language in the motion. I think it's very clear. I understand what the intent is. But again, understanding that we have no idea what that point is going to be. And I also want to make it clear, if at the end of the day, block 2 completely all comes down, because that's what the municipally contracted structural engineer states, that wasn't because this motion was ineffective. That was because a municipally contracted structural engineer said that that's what was required to achieve life safety. And any point in between the west wall and the end of block 2, that would still, that is still the same. That is fact. How we move forward, working with the property owner in regards to the remainder of the blocks, and it requires future considerations, and what that's going to look like, we don't know.
Councillor Todd, you were next. He's good now. Any other discussion? I think that's ready to call the vote. We have the motion on the screen. All in favor? Carried. And I'll pass the chair back.
Well, thank you for that very thoughtful process and discussion and debate from around the table. I'm going to move on to item number 5, the confirmatory bylaw. It is now time for the confirmatory bylaw. This bylaw confirms the proceedings that took place this evening and provides a formal adoption through a bylaw. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Todd. All in favor? Thank you. This concludes our business to be covered on today's agenda. We've reached the end of the agenda, and I'm in a position to adjourn the meeting at 7:41 p.m. Thank you very much for all in the audience and in attendance.